Today I will tell you about Mariupol. The city is located on the coast of the Azov Sea in the southern eastern area of Ukraine in Donetsk Oblast. It is a major port, an industrial center of the country, and most importantly, my home. Mariupol received the status of a hero city on the 6th of March 2022. This rank manifests acts of heroism and resilience of the city's inhabitants during fighting Russia's armed aggression against Ukraine. Mariupol has been under siege for 30 days. 90% of the city has been destroyed. More than 230,000 people have died. Many still haven't been found, so this number might be higher. This is UA, the day that we survived. Ukrainian journalists have come together to create it with real people who record themselves and send us their recordings. Why is the enemy so hostile towards Mariupol? First and foremost, because this city is a symbol of Ukrainian spirit in the East. In 2014, after Donetsk was captured and the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic emerged, Mariupol was also in danger of occupation. However, the Ukrainian militaries expelled the separatists from the city in the March of 2014 during an anti-terrorist operation, ruining Putin's plans of creating Novorossiya on Ukrainian territory. Since then, Mariupol has become the new West Berlin, the city located on the border with the occupied territory, which, like West Berlin, has become an example of reforms and development. Valentina reminisces about her life. She was born in 1948 in Mariupol.
The little girl grew up in her small hometown Mariupol, near a large metallurgical factory. She grew up, and the city grew up with her. Her brown eyes admired new wide streets and squares. There were even avenues and fountains. Parks, beaches, vacation homes, and children camps blossomed. Here, she graduated school. The gold medal with straight A's paved the way for higher education, but the desire to participate in the development of Mariupol made her combine study and work in the new cold roll department in the factory. The young engineer was among those who developed the technology of production of broadband zinc-coated rolls and later led the chemical technological group of the lab for more than 20 years. Here she found love. Here her daughters and grandchildren grew up. Mariupol, with a population of 500,000 people, has become a large and fascinating city. Modern houses, shopping and entertainment centers, Freedom Square, swimming pool Neptune, sports complexes, new kindergartens, lyceums, 6 universities, administrative service centers, the most beautiful Christmas trees in Ukraine near the theater, various festivals of folk and contemporary art and cultures of all nations who lived, built, revered, and garnished their hometown. The new development projects of Mariupol, generated by specialists and active use of the city, attracted many different investments, even from other European countries, and were to make our industrial and cultural city even more touristy in the next few years. We wanted the whole world to see how prosperous our city is and love it as much as we do. But on March 19, this girl, as an elderly woman, with tears and under the roar of a cannon, left her beloved and burned city. War does not have a woman's face. Women of Mariupol do not have water, food, heating, light. What they have is fear for the lives of their children, who do not understand why their joyful laughter disturbed someone, why smoke and destroyed buildings are everywhere, and why lifeless people laying down on the roads do not get up. Oh, the whole world that I wanted to embrace, do hear the cry of a little girl from Mariupol. Mom, I don't want to die.
Mariupolians say that they are used to living close to war, so the first strikes in 2022 didn't scare many. Only a small portion of people decided to evacuate. Some even wanted to return to the city as soon as possible. Natalia, Valentina's daughter, met the war far away from Mariupol. She tells about her first thoughts on the 24th of February and her experience of living near the front line.
A few days before the war, my husband and I went on vacation to the Carpathians. The war caught us suddenly, like anyone else. We were shocked and spent the first few hours on the phone. The first thing I thought about was that I urgently needed to go home because in Mariupol I left my mother, sister with her family, cousins, mother-in-law and all my friends and godparents. I really hoped that I could get home quickly and somehow be able to help everyone. But the bridges were already blown up, the trains were no longer running. The second thought that came to my mind was that I was not ready for this war at all. Although for me it did not start on February 24th. In 2014, when Russia decided to take our territories, it was clear that real patriots would fight for Ukraine. We decided to prepare all our households for war as much as possible. We had time to buy groceries, we had time to pack a go-bag, we have inspected our cellar, we installed ventilation, gathered the necessary tools in case the house would be bombed and we would have to save ourselves. We prepared a place in the cellar for my mother, who at that time was a 70-year-old pensioner. We have prepared. Sometime later, in January 2015, our eastern district of the city was shelled, but then Ukraine found strength to defend itself. Our enemies were driven back several kilometers from the city. We were anxious but believed that they would not come closer to the city. And every day our confidence got stronger. Our city was returning to its usual life, but the food and the go-bag stood in their place for almost a year. Then it became clear that these preparations were probably no longer needed. We used the groceries, unpacked our suitcases, and began to lead our normal lives.
Anna is 28 years old. She was born and raised in Mariupol. In 2014, she used to say that she is from the city which is defending.
8 years ago, when Russia invaded Ukraine, my whole family stayed in the city, even when Russian tanks were 20 kilometers from the city. We were worried, but it seemed that we were in a safe area, where there was no shooting. This time my family is safe again, but not all of it. For 28 days I have not heard the voice of my grandfather, who will turn 85 in July. In peacetime, I often came to Mariupol to spend time with my parents, go to sea, talk to my grandparents, show the city to my boyfriend, and stay in a place where I grew up. Just for the big weekend on the 8th of March, I was planning a new trip to my hometown. It was a place for me to regain strength and peace. But then the 24th of February came. During the first days, it seemed to us that Mariupol was the safest city. They were fighting in Kyiv, Kharkiv, Sumy back then, and nothing seemed to be happening in Mariupol. We also discussed with my family that it might be best for everyone to go there. There is a house there. But then the situation began to change. While there was a connection, I called my grandfather and friends every day and asked how they were. My grandfather refused to leave. He joked that if he would crawl somewhere, that would be a cemetery. I tried to remind about the simple actions during the shelling, where he needed to stay and all of that. On the 1st of March, I called and he told me it was scary. He was very upset. It was unclear what was going to happen and he would not mind moving to Mariupol suburbs. There he had a house, fruit trees, a vegetable garden he could occupy his head with. And that house was situated a little further from the fighting. I was no longer in touch with anyone, not my grandfather or my friends. They were already sitting in the basements back then.
In the first week of occupation, the city was cut off from power supply. Water shortage followed later. After enemy strikes hit the gas pipelines, citizens remained without any heating in February frosts. What is it like to be left without heat and electricity in February? My grandmother slept for 3 weeks on a mattress in the corridor of her Mariupol apartment, with a hat and winter coat on, covered with 3 blankets. The windows were taped with newspapers and scotch tape to prevent the glass from shattering during the shelling, so the apartment was quite dark day and night. After 2 weeks of sheltering at home, she decided to visit a friend next door to offer some support. When she went outside, the sun was shining so bright, and it seemed as if the weather was warm. She couldn't help but sit down on a bench in the yard to warm up and breathe fresh air for the first time since the shelling of the city began. The woman who accompanied her begged her to go home because it was dangerous outside, but my grandmother really wanted to stay there a little longer. Eventually, in a few minutes, they both came into the lobby, and as soon as the metal door behind them closed, a loud explosion erupted. In the yard, an enemy missile exploded in the air, destroying the bench they were sitting on. Nobody went out to see the sun anymore. On the 21st of March, the occupants destroyed the last means of communication in the city. A deliberate information vacuum was created in Mariupol so that no citizen would know what was going on. Relatives couldn't keep calm while having no way of hearing from those who stayed back in Mariupol. Like Anya, whom we have already heard in this episode.
Зараз абонент знаходиться поза зоною досяжності. Будь ласка, залиште повідомлення після сигналу.
By this day, we have been calling Grandpa every day, but we only hear that the subscriber was not available at the moment. For some time, we have tried to find out how my grandfather was doing. I found a group on social networks where people wrote where the shelling was, where the houses were intact, and so on. There we learned that there was no water in the city, no heat, no food, that some people were cooking food on the streets at the campfire and organizing some points with generators to charge phones.
Організовуються якісь пункти з генераторами, щоб заряджати телефони.
In general, it is very strange to hear in the 21st century, and in fact, it still doesn't fit in my head. Although I read about it every day, and I've even heard such stories from my friends, and it's all very scary and immeasurable. The situation in the city is very changeable. What was relevant in the morning, in the evening could burn out, and the lives would be taken away. I try not to look at the photos of Mariupol. I don't recognize the city anymore, and it hurts a lot. My beloved industrial city has been torn to pieces by Russians, whom I sincerely hate, and I will pass this rage on to my children.
Due to the lack of communication, it was also unclear how people in the bomb shelters would find out about the possibility of leaving the city. Evacuating from a city on the brink of a humanitarian catastrophe was, and still is, very risky. No one knows if they will arrive in one piece. Russians deliberately sabotaged the evacuation of civilians more than once by attacking the routes by which the Ukrainian government planned to evacuate people. Instead, Russia blames sabotaging the evacuation on Ukrainian soldiers. Halina, a volunteer from Mariupol, talks about her work in the city and the difficult decision to leave it.
Привіт, мене звати Галя. Я з міста Маріуполя.
The last time I saw my native city was 4 days ago. I was there during occupation and working with other people in the educational space Halabuda, which again became a volunteer center as it was in 2014.
На волонтерський центр, з якого він постав ще у 2014 році.
My typical work was to accept new volunteers. More and more showed up with each passing day of occupation and hostilities. I divided responsibilities between them. During the first hours after the beginning of the war on 24th of February, people started bringing help to the center, food and hygiene products for the military.
У волонтерський центр почали приносити першу допомогу, банальну їжу і засоби гігієни для наших військових.
At that time, we still didn't believe the worst, but we continued to prepare for it. We had an optimistic mood in the first days, despite the fact that we covered the windows with bags of cement and were preparing for shelling. There were nearly 150 people with me, and they became my family for these 3 weeks. Every day we started with breakfast. After that, some people went to load and unload goods, primarily food and water, and others stayed to sort them. My emotional state during this period was stable despite shelling and air raids. The last half of the last day was the worst.
Сигнали повітряна тривога. Найгіршим для мене був останній день, навіть півдня. в Маріуполі.
The shopping center caught fire on the next street, and on the other street we saw Russian soldiers and tanks.
Центр, через вулицю від місця знаходження нашого волонтерського центру ми вже побачили російських строкових військових і їхні танки. Рішення.
I decided to evacuate. I didn't want to endanger others, especially my family, because of my volunteer work. So I made a quick decision, and in half an hour I was in a car with 5 people, 2 dogs, and a minimum of things.
За півгодини ми вже були в машині, в 6 в маленькому гольфі, з 2 собаками і з мінімумом речей. Напевно, це
For 3 days while I was getting from Mariupol to the free part of Ukraine, I was crying and realizing that it was good that I said goodbye to my family, and it was bad because I might not see them again. And these people, volunteers who decided to stay in the city, are heroes. And who am I? I don't know. I don't have a home anymore. I don't have a team that had been working with me for 6 years and became especially dear to me during the last 3 weeks.
Хто я не знаю. Більше в мене немає дому, команди, яка працювала поряд 6 років, і останні 3 тижні була особливо рідною і підтримуючою для мене. В мене більше немає.
I don't have a cat anymore, but I have a stranger dog that has become mine.
Собака, яка стала рідною за цей час і живе тепер зі мною.
So for me, this is probably a new beginning with old values.
Старими цінностями.
There are many confirmed cases of Mariupolians being smuggled into Russian territory, including children, medics, and hospital patients. Just imagine, first, the enemy destroys your house with all kinds of weapons, kills people dear to you, destroys the infrastructure that ensures your existence, and then saves you by smuggling you into its territory. Russians allow themselves to speak of Ukrainians as a brotherly nation, but the Russian army has already killed more Russian-speaking people than Ukrainian nationalists throughout the history. Natalia Hayetska was lucky enough to evacuate from Mariupol to the territory of Ukraine. Here is her story.
We were waiting for the announcement, but then we felt that we had to leave. We just saw more and more cars on the streets, so we decided either people in these cars knew something or they took their own risk. We also decided to flee. But how? I don't have a car, and you are simply doomed without it. We were lucky to find 2 cars that agreed to take me, my old parents, and my 4 cats. We left Mariupol on the 17th of March late in the morning. We were going to Zaporizhzhia through Berdyansk. We were moving in a column, like everyone, because moving apart from others was dangerous. Firstly, we drove quickly, but there was a lot of Russian checkpoints and queues in front of them, so we were standing there for a long time. We were warned that the road would be very long, but we hadn't imagined how long it would be. The real problem was that fuel ran out, and there was no place to get it. First, we had no idea about turning off the car in the traffic jam. Even when you turned it off, in a few minutes you had to move again, so the fuel burned very quickly. There was a danger that fuel would run out in the middle of the road. All gas stations were empty on the way to Zaporizhzhia. We were given advice to stand near the car with an empty bottle so that people could guess that we needed gasoline. When it got dark and nothing could be seen, we chose the wrong direction and were stopped at Chechen checkpoint when curfew started. What we had to do? Staying in the middle of the road? Many people were staying. They were standing the night in the cars. It was very cold, sub-zero temperature. There was no chance to heat the car because gasoline needed to be saved for moving, not for heating. We were looking for a place to spend the night, but on our way all the gadgets were discharging very quickly. We were constantly looking for a connection, thus the gadgets discharged. We searched, then turned them off, searched, then turned them off. My colleague from Lviv was also looking for options for us on the internet and later said that we should go to a village a few kilometers away. Their mayor said that we would be hosted because curfew in their neighborhood began later. We turned, drove to the village. The mayor gave us shelter in the emergency room on the chairs and tables. We had a bottle in the car. It turned to ice overnight and did not melt until we got to Zaporizhia.
According to local authorities, about 140,000 people were able to leave the besieged Mariupol, but approximately 170,000 more are still waiting for help. Two major metallurgical plants in the city are or have been in working condition. Mariupol metallurgical plant, named after Ilyich, and Azov Steel, whose products make up a significant part of Ukrainian exports. Managing director of Azov Steel, Enver Tkitishvili, reports, 2 missiles have hit the metallurgical plant, but it is too early to say that the plant stopped working forever. The last time Azov Steel completely stopped working was in 1941, due to the war with Nazi Germany, while in 1943, after freeing Mariupol, restoration work started. 2 missiles fell on the plant. The first one hit the warehouse. The second one got very close to the coke batteries. No place is safe in Mariupol now. The enemy is destroying not only industrial facilities, but also the homes of Mariupol residents, hospitals, shelters, architectural monuments, and art centers. The City Council of Mariupol claims that Russians fire from 50 to 100 aerial missiles at the city each day. The occupiers destroyed 90% of the city's buildings. Among the destroyed objects is the drama theater, the Neptune swimming pool, where hundreds of people, mostly women, children, and the elderly, hid from constant shelling. The Children's Rehabilitation Center, the Maternity Hospital, the Arkhip Kuinji Art Museum, Port City Mall, and many others. Having destroyed Mariupol, the Russians probably hoped to show their fellow citizens that this war was not in vain. Because the Kremlin's propaganda justified its invasion of Ukraine by denazification since the beginning of hostilities. The headquarters of the Azov military division, which Russians accuse of Nazism the most, was situated in Mariupol. In fact, the Azov battalion was created in 2014 from volunteers who fought in Donbass. These are the soldiers who, after the shelling of the Shidny district in Mariupol in January 2015, went on the offensive at the cost of their lives, holding back enemy artillery, after which no one fired at civilians, until the 24th of February of 2022. Today, Azov Battalion is a separate special unit of the National Guard of Ukraine, which protects Mariupol from those who mercilessly drop bombs on women and children. From Russian invaders, of course. If they capture Mariupol, it will give Russia control. Over one of Ukraine's largest ports and allow it to create a land corridor between Crimea and the separatist territories in Donetsk and Luhansk. But we will not allow that to happen. The city is under the Ukrainian flag. Today Mariupol stands as a Ukrainian hero city. Our military is doing everything to ensure that this will always be the case. Fierce fights with the occupants are still going on. Mariupol is a besieged fortress that is still holding on thanks to the efforts of the Ukrainian military, as well as the doctors, volunteers, journalists who cover Russian crimes, and citizens who believe in Ukraine's victory.